So this roundtable, I will say, is sort of overdue, I would say. We've had these AECtech symposiums very heavily skewed towards the AE, to the point of having, this is the first time we're having a construction roundtable. So over the last 9 years. So again, I'm Rob Otani, Chief Technology Officer at Thornton Tomasetti. And if you could all introduce yourselves, maybe starting with you at the end there.
Hi, my name is Greg Dunkle. I am the Chief Administrative Officer for
There's a microphone on the table for you.
Going to use some technology. How's that? We'll start out with some technology. Again, Greg Dunkle. I am the Chief Administrative Officer for STO Building Group, and happy to be here and appreciate the invitation.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jennifer Downey. I'm Director of Innovation at Turner Construction Company.
Hey guys, Parker Mundt, Operating Director at Suffolk Technologies, which is the venture arm of Suffolk Construction.
Tzvetkov, Director of EDC Emerging Technology for Skanska.
Thanks, Val. So I will say, I've known Val for many years. He's been coming to our event for many years. And the reason why I'm excited about this event is because this industry does not work unless we get the sort of unified workflow of AEC. And I should really add that's a big player as well. But at least we have today, a good representation of AEC here today. And so this isn't a discussion. So I'm not really asking anyone individually, at least not yet. But it's really for anybody who has a strong opinion on some of these questions that I've prepared. And of course, we're going to have some questions later on for the audience as well. First one being, what are your top 3 challenges in today's construction market, just in general? Be good to hear. Anybody?
I'm happy to start. When I was looking at the questions ahead, Rob, I thought maybe it would be better to ask, what are the top 3 things that aren't challenges? Because that would probably be a better list. But I think there's so many opportunities for improvement in both the architecture and the construction side. And what we've really been trying to focus on is how we identify and prioritize those opportunities, because otherwise you could start anywhere, right? But how do you really focus in on what those key business problems are and what has the greatest potential for change? And so at Turner, we've started implementing this process recently as part of our innovation process that's called problem framing. And this is an innovation methodology that we're using to sort of look at the framework of opportunities all along the landscape of the construction process and every stage that we're involved in, and evaluate and prioritize those opportunities and develop these problem statements that we can then use to collectively go and form these sort of broad teams to jump in and tackle. So I realize, Rob, that that's not exactly answering your question,
No, that's fine.
but I think it is an important piece of it, right? That it's not just starting anywhere. It's how do you figure out where to start your efforts?
So I'll jump in there. At STO Building Group, we have grown quite a bit in the last 3 years. We're just about to reach 10 billion in revenue. And as we see our workforce and the workforce of our colleagues and our subcontractors, we really see a void about to happen. And as we all know, it's the people who build buildings, and that technology supports those individuals. So as we look to the coming years, and we see individuals starting to age out or decide that they want to go to Florida and get on their boat or go fishing, how do we tap into that? How do we make sure we don't lose that knowledge? And it can't really be replaced just with technology. And I think it was stated in the previous session that we really need to embrace maybe a slower move to retirement. How do we capture that knowledge? Even are we using virtual, or even some of our subs now are amazing, and they're using augmented reality, where some of their technicians are wearing these goggles and they have maybe, the Wizard of Oz behind the curtain, who's miles and miles away, helping them work through those problems that are happening on the job site. So we got to find and cultivate those leaders and that experience and keep it within our industry.
I also, just to add on to that, I think something that we're struggling with, I think as a whole in the industry is how do we handle this emerging technology wave that's coming through construction and AEC as a whole? How do we keep the younger generation excited about where we're going as an industry and not try to phase out or push out the older industry or the older members of the industry as if to say, the technology is going to replace you guys, please move on, because that's certainly not the case. We've always talked about how do we leverage technology to augment kind of our labor shortage that we have right now. And that's labor shortage all the way from actual labor on the job site up through professional management of the construction job site. And I think what goes hand in hand in that, and one of the larger problems we've seen is kind of around data collection and how do we utilize and leverage that data. And I think a lot of what we've been looking at, especially at Suffolk, is what kind of data do we have, not what kind of data do we want. And there's a massive difference between the two of those. And we look at, we have historical data on all of our job sites, and you break that down by asset class and number of RFIs, versus each type of architect and our project teams, but we don't, dive down to that next level, which is what we're doing now, about what's the data we actually want and how are we then able to really leverage that to move the decision chain quicker along our whole industry, because we all know we're kind of in the midst of a very fragmented industry. So how do we really focus on the interfaces to kind of smooth that over? Because quite oftentimes in our silos, you feel like you might be operating quickly and efficiently as a construction manager, and you turn around and ask the owner, developer, or the architect or engineer, and they're like, they're slow. And it's like there's a little bit of like that interface there that we're trying to bridge over. And kind of to tie it back full circle, I was fortunate enough to join these guys last night at Thornton Tomasetti, and it's really interesting to hear kind of what the guys at TestFit are doing, what we're doing internally at Suffolk, what you guys are doing internally at Thornton Tomasetti. And it's like, at what point do all those parties come together and say, we're looking to build out a platform to advance the industry together as a whole, as compared to what we have is helpful for Suffolk, and what you guys might have might be helpful for Thornton Tomasetti. And by the way, who's going to be able to convince the client or owner to pay for that and be the first one into it? So I think that's a little bit of what we're dealing with. And again, why we're really excited to be here today talking about it.
Yeah, I would add also carbon emission, energy efficiency. That's a big challenge that's coming in the next 20, 30 years. And how does technology help energy efficiency in construction? What do we do next to make it better for the next generations? And Skanska has a goal. By 2030, they're looking to cut emissions to 75%. So that's very aggressive, because it's 2030 is around the corner. And by 2045, they want to get rid of emissions altogether. So that's something organizationally that we have to kind of work to cut emissions, and how does technology fit into that? And so we've looked at carbon emissions. Skanska's developed a carbon calculator that's a free tool for everybody, for the industry. Can be used by anybody, designers, construction companies, to find the embodied carbon in a building. And so with tools like that, and with kind of open source mentality, we all need to work together to get to that goal.
Yeah, I think maybe just to add on to that, if I could, there's also an aspect of that, which is how do we make sure that the construction managers are informed as to what our owners, developers, and longtime asset holders really want out of their physical space? That's to say, calculating carbon, is one thing, but what are the metrics associated with the owner operator side of the house? And so how can we actually forward that process to help them achieve those goals, and make sure we're all working off the same sheet of music, such that it's not, hey, we cut our carbon emissions by X, but the owner's like that, maybe that's not as important to me, because what I have to report on is actually Y. And so a little bit of what I think things like this are really important for is make sure we're all speaking on the same sheet of music to say, the way that we're starting to develop our own data repository, let's make sure that it's translatable up the value chain and also down the value chain, because at the end of the day, I'm not swinging a hammer. I would get kicked off the job site in some of our markets if I did touch any of the tools on site anyways. So how do we communicate upstream? How do we also communicate and translate that downstream to the folks that we're actually paying to do the work in the field, and make sure we're harnessing that all the way through the value chain?
So I'm going to switch a little bit. I'm going to change this question a little bit based on what I heard, because it's always been interesting to me. I think I talked to Jennifer, I don't know what it was, like a year ago, and she rattled off all these things that they were using, which I never heard of. And so it'd be good for the audience here to hear, like, what are the few technologies that you're starting to either research or utilize on projects that you hadn't even 2 years ago? I mean, anyone can answer that question.
Oh, boy. I think we set a bad precedent here. Okay, so Rob, I didn't know, you threw that out there. Let's see if I can remember all the things that we're working on. So one of the things is just both that we're working both internally to develop processes and technologies, as well as working with external companies. And I think that combination is really important because, you know, as we've seen from each of the different groups today, that there's components that you have the ability to control within your own processes and workflows, but then there's also these really amazing startups that are really focused on, you know, solving very specific problems, and being able to leverage kind of a combination of both of those can be really beneficial. And it's a long list, but I'll give you some of my top favorites, maybe. Yeah. We've been working with Versatile's CraneView product for the last 3 years. We really like that tool. It's an underhook mounted sensor array that involves both a hardware software component. And what we found with that is that because the crane is sort of the heartbeat of the project, right? We're moving all the materials, or a large amount of the materials, through the crane. And by being able to identify not only what's going on to our job sites, but monitor that crane efficiency, that data can really drive change on the projects. You know, that it's a lot of times we have sort of this anecdotal thing where we know that there might be a problem that needs to be addressed, but when it can be data driven and backed up by that information, that we can address it much sooner and make these small incremental changes that can really affect the overall construction schedule. So a change that might be a 10 or a 15-minute optimization of a curtain wall panel assembly in the rigging process, when it's extrapolated over hundreds and hundreds of curtain wall panels, can save days, if not weeks, on our construction schedule. So that's one example. We've been working really closely with Boston Dynamics with the Spot robot, and testing both the mobility and autonomy of the robot, along with some advanced continuous LiDAR scanning from Leica, to understand what that value proposition might look like, and how we're able to automate a lot of the job site documentation capture. Gosh, I could keep going and going, but I'm going to hand it over to you guys, and we'll hand it off.
Bail you out there here for a minute. So let me for a minute just explain a little bit about what's happened at STOBG with innovation. So again, like I said, we're growing leaps and bounds. And this year I'm happy to announce that our C-suite will be joined by a chief data officer. And then we also, in the last month and a half, brought on a chief innovation officer. And with that group working with our CIO, it's pretty exciting right now. And because our growth came both organically and came through merger partners, we have the benefit, or the curse, whichever way you like to put it, is about over 200 different applications that have been brought on board in the last 3 years with all of our new merger partners. So we get to experience many different applications, many different tools, regardless of whether we chose them or they came along for the ride. And what that's actually done, which is pretty neat, is allow us, in what we call our Concord program, is to compare and contrast different applications being used with different types of sectors and different geographies around the world. And that's brought us as a team together to be able to make one of three choices. do we move to an application or a technology that one individual already has and has been successful with? Also to explore and to test drive other applications and technology that we don't currently employ, but it's part of our innovation strategy to go out and take a look at it. And everyone moved to that one. And then the third is really interesting too, which is, do we just all remain absolutely autonomous in the technology and the applications, which with our data strategy makes things very complicated when we try to pull that data in. And to give you a couple quick examples, our innovation strategy really has three different legs to the stool. One is AEC Angels, which we're happy to be part of with Thornton Tomasetti. And that is where, as an organization, we are actually funding startups. And in those startups, what we do is we come together with the AEC Angels, and we all decide that, hey, we're going to go ahead and fund one of our technologies that might be starting up. We've also had a partnership with Falkbuilt. So we're actually getting not only into the technology of, let's say, software, but also into the technology of making our construction process better through a vendor and through a subcontractor. And then finally, we explore both internally with our folks. We have a Shark Tank process, which we go through in order to promote innovation. And then we also partner with the architects and engineers and designers. So, just to throw one out real quick is Bridget. I don't know if you've heard of that technology, but having over 4,000 individuals, where would they be best utilized is really a problem for a larger company. And then also, how do they fit in with the starts, the stops? When an owner decides that we're going to push the project out, we need to be very efficient with our folks in order to make sure that they stay busy. And they're also challenged and are headed to a project that's going to help the greater good. So Bridget would be one that we're currently exploring. Cool.
Yeah, I'm happy I can speak about it. I guess kind of if we went through the frameworks around our own respective offices, I can talk about what we're doing at Suffolk briefly. There's quite a bit going on. I guess about 5 years ago, we started these things called co-labs. They're physical spaces. They reside in 7 of our offices across the country. Within each of those physical spaces sits a construction solutions director. Their sole responsibility is to source, promote, help scale, do product development alongside startups, and then ultimately roll those out onto our job sites. So over the past 5 years, just to throw out some metrics, we've piloted over 190 different solutions, so similar to some other folks. Of those 190, only about 6 of them have stuck as national solutions, meaning they've rolled out in 4 or more of our offices and are on 10 plus jobs. So go figure, there's kind of a problem there in itself. There's a lot of point solutions that come up that may be super hot for a year, then disappear, or might get bought up and then roll into a larger platform play. I think as a whole, it's important just to kind of level set. There's 1,500 construction tech companies globally. At Suffolk, we'll take a look at 600 or 700 of them a year. We set up our own venture capital group called Suffolk Technologies, which I joined last year. We've been around for about 2.5 years. We've made 25 investments or so in the space. And then ultimately, we will either vet them out or we get that, from our job sites saying, hey, we saw this really cool technology. We want to use it. You guys should take a look at them from a technology standpoint. So we kind of have a little bit of a bi-directional relationship there. Through that's come, some great experiments with things like open space. One of the reasons why we really like open space is just because it touches a lot of members along the value chain, similar to something like what TestFit does. But in the regards for open space, it's great because you actually are leaving the client with a digital view of what their job site looked like, timestamped. So if they ever want to go back and there's a leak in a wall in 3-5 years, they can go back and say, what did that wall look like before it was closed up? So adding value up the value chain, also adding value down the value chain to our subcontractors and saying, we can now do autonomous progress reporting. We know how many linear feet of drywall and studs was installed on which day with the capture. So we're really starting to build upon that. And from that comes that data capture and repository just to make us smarter. So the next time we go out to build a project, we're leveraging that data to say, we know this project type, we know the subcontractor, we've done this before, they work at 550 square feet per day, whatever, you plug that in. So we're starting to get smarter in that regard. And the last thing I'll say is we do also run a boost program, very similar to Shark Tank concept. This is our 2nd year running it. We had 105 applications to it this year. And kind of in that spirit of collaboration to try to break these silos, We actually have partnered a lot with Liberty Mutual this year, Procore, Open Space, RXR Realty. So we have the developer side, we have the insurance carrier side. And it's a 6-week sprint program. So it just started 2 weeks ago. It ends the first week in December with like a capstone demo day where there's investors, potential customers, kind of what have you. The idea being, bring us your biggest business problem, which is oftentimes cross-functional, and let us try to solve it in a 6-week sprint, which is why it's really important to have folks like Hilti, Liberty Mutual, RXR Realty in the room. And so instead of going back and forth for 2 or 3 weeks to set up a meeting, it's like we have them right here. They're bought into the program as a partner. So let's solve it here and now. And so I think that kind of idea of collaboration to try to break the silos is a lot of where the tech space is headed, in particular in construction technology.
At Skanska, we have hundreds of applications. I mean, maybe we have too many. I think that's like, but I want to frame the conversation a little differently. I want to talk about kind of the culture and the people and how we actually get that problem to solve it with an application. And one thing we're seeing is that we need that pipeline to the field, you know, to be able to identify problems, to have field champions that are versed in today's technology, be able to, those field champions to communicate back and kind of identify an issue that they're seeing there in real time. And so that's kind of like our approach is grassroots, is really being able to mine that information and then form applications around it. And so there's hundreds of those, there's overlaps and everything else. So, and my approach has always been to do less, you know, do more with less, you know, because I think another challenge we're having, our field teams have all these applications on their iPads and it's slowing them down actually, I think. So we try to make it efficient for everybody to do their job, but not overbear them with all these different technologies on the field. So that's kind of been my approach.
Yeah, so if I could speak to that, I was just in Toronto this week, working with one of our teams with a client that I'm involved in. And I walked the space, and to your point, we use a lot of technology, and I think we're the bridge between the folks that actually put the physical elements in place in construction. And it occurred to me that some of the technology that we're using, for instance, digital punch lists and putting them into our applications is really good for us. It's great for the designers. The owner gets to see it and it's really controlled. But that individual that's going from space to space, trying to solve those punch list items may not have that technology, may have only been there, that's their first day. And so to your point, sometimes we need to look at technology and applications and go, okay, what is the interface to the person that really has to finish this job? And it occurred to me that while we did have the iPads and we had the phones, the individual with the paintbrush or trying to put that last piece of base in or fixing a nick in a wall, that's who we really need to get to, because that last 5-10% of a job is terrible. It's really, really hard to get done. I mean, if you've been in operations, you know that's the hardest part, to get out and try to get out before you even have a punch list. So we've learned that you really have to marry some of this technology with something that's going to fit with the individuals, that's going to finish the job for you. And sometimes you need to put that piece of paper back up on the door that says, hey, there's something in here, Mr. Painter, as you walk by, or Mrs. Painter, please go in here and touch up this corner. So we need to be cognizant of, as we push technology, are we pushing ourselves away from, I would say, a simple or basic solution that was tried and true, or do we need to push it so far that that person's mobile phone goes off when they go next to a door and says, well, hold on a second, walk in the room 203 and put that piece of base in. So, I mean, we can go the whole way, or we need to go part way and then meet our trades and our friends that help us finish the job in an effective way.
I mean, I think what you're really talking about is this idea of understanding the value of what the problem is you're trying to solve, right? That it's not really always a technology problem. Sometimes if you take a piece of technology and put it on a bad process, you could just make everything worse. And it's important for, I mean, it's a really exciting time from a technology perspective because, I mean, as we've all said, right, there's hundreds and thousands of construction technology solutions out there, and they're developing so rapidly. I think we've seen that increase in the last couple of years, and I think it's just going to continue to accelerate the number of solutions that are out there, but also, being thoughtful about the way that you're applying the technology to really solve those core problems and not put a technology where you just could use a process change.
Yes.
And just to put an exclamation point on that, when an owner walks past a space and there's a punch list and that punch list is being checked off and there's lines through it and there's that basic little bit, oh, it's getting done and we're going to be okay. Well, when it's in the cloud and it's not happening, you don't see that somebody's signed off, somebody else has signed off. And sure, if we have a good dashboard and it's an owner and a dashboard for a designer, that's fantastic. But there's something about that element to touch, feel, and see progress that sometimes disappears in the cloud that I guess my gray hair tells me that sometimes we need a little piece of paper somewhere to make me feel good.
Yeah, I'm gonna switch gears a little bit, just given timing. This one is it's a different line of questioning. This is more of the integration part between design and construction. And it's a question about the standard of care, which for many of you is a very old sort of process that the standard of care was derived, as I showed in some of my slides, in the early 1900s, like when this building was built, and we still use it today. So the question is, there's a kind of a built-in, I will say, silo of design and construction. And we all been through projects where the best scenarios is when those two sort of merge. And so the question, for the group here is, how would you like to see that standard of care change as it relates to the design team as to the construction team?
I'll start with this. I think I'll take your model. I'll take your model, but I'm looking for some kind of standards there when we do take that 3D model in, and clash free doesn't mean anything. So it has to be a tangible sort of thing that we can kind of metric around. And so when we receive the design model, we have some standards that we set up. We work with the designers early on to make it measurable. So when you're at 100%, we both agree that you're at 100%.
So let me jump in there. I think from our perspective, a lot of times in our business, we transfer data and just assume that you know what you're going to do with that data. And are we really missing the why? Has the design communicated to the builders? Why is it this way? What is the intent of the drawings? And usually we only talk about intent of a drawing when all of a sudden something happens in the field and it's messed up. Oh, that wasn't the intent, or yeah, that's the intent. I think that's what really needs, and from the communication with some of my colleagues is, Roger Salibi's here and Stephen Dennis from our group. And we talked about, what is it, the narrative that you're handing us when you hand us a model? And in my position, I'm also responsible for, the legal groups. We got to push them out of it. And the best projects are when we cooperate. And we all know that when you default back to, well, is this my responsibility, your responsibility? You've already lost the game, right? It's really about getting out in front of it and starting, just like we start a construction project that has to be safe and it has to be clean, and then it remains safe and it remains clean. I think that transfer and that incorporation with us and our trades who are highly engaged in being able to take a design and move it forward efficiently is really the narrative. It's the sitting down and discussing it, and it's actually giving us the why, so we can work with what you've been given and the owners have asked you to do, and we're not left out of that conversation.
I think if it comes down to the idea of like, how do you produce the most complete set of information to get to the subcontractors that are going to build eventually, right? So in that design process, what are the pieces of information that each party needs? How do you collaborate earlier, more frequently? Who are those experts that need to be brought in from each of the different parties? I think what we've seen in the last several years too is sort of a blurring of lines of expertise that our design teams bring incredible knowledge and expertise that maybe you wouldn't expect to see from those different parties, or that your GCs and CMs also have internal knowledge and expertise that, you know, if it's bringing together supply chain information with design intent, right? Like, how does that produce a more comprehensive and complete set of information so that all those sort of nuances have been figured out ahead of time rather than it happening during the construction process?
Right.
Also, I think just the last thing I would add on to this, I'll echo everything that's been said, first and foremost. But secondly, I also think there's an aspect of us as an industry feeling like everybody is actually on the same page, where I think that we are all sorely mistaken if we think that. And I say that just meaning more of, you know, I think it's really important to understand, you know, what do you want to get back from us when we get a set of SDs or DDs? Like, be very explicit of that. And then secondly, like the design pull plan phase of this, like let's start to pull in the subcontractors that we need only when we need them. There's might not be a reason to go into bring in a finished subcontractor the first week of a project. That might be exciting and fun to look at, but really, like, let's get the foundation figured out. Let's talk about the skin of the building. Let's look at lead times and start to incorporate that up front. And we can pull in those subcontractors to get the fabrication moving as fast as possible. I think with that, and part of the kind of the biggest constraint in our industry, one of them is that when that clock starts of that fabrication time, there's some changes cannot be made at a certain point. And I think there's a lot of that kind of give and take that we all see with each other of like, hey, I still might want to be able to tweak that a little bit. And we're like, hey, if you want to hit the schedule, you can't. And there's a little bit of kind of that back and forth that I think, you know, with a lot of rules put in place and a specific playbook that starts to involve the manufacturers and the subcontractors involved there, I think we can actually start to smooth that out. I think we've seen some success stories in the past of that. And part of the conversation last night went to, you know, we are a pretty litigious, heavy group. And I don't think that's any surprise to anybody in here, but there's the aspect of, do we have to look at something like an IPD contractual structure before we can start to do things like this? Or can we say to legal, you know, take stuff aside and let us handle this one for now? And I think that's something to debate for sure. So.
Yeah, and you know, one thing that came up, we had a little discussion last night about this, which again was informative for me, because, you know, I think it was Cliff from Suffolk was saying that the fees that construction managers get for pre-construction is like tiny. Sometimes, yeah, exactly. Or well,
it's called free con.
Yeah, he called it free con, right? And so those are the times when we as designers actually need that information to drive our project in the right direction. And so I think there needs to be some contractual sort of changes in that process, or at least value add contractual changes, potentially all the way down to the subcontractors, right? Because you know, no one really wants to give their secret sauce away for free, potentially knowing that they're not going to get the project, right? So I don't know if you guys have any you know, opinions about that. Because unless that happens, we're going to keep going down the same track.
Yeah, that you can keep going, Rob. That sounds really good. Yeah,
I get it.
Thanks for voicing our pain.
Only thing I would say is that we're also kind of at the uppermost part of that, where we still will maybe be fighting for or competing for a project, and then below us there's a whole nother set of subcontractors who are also doing the same with us. And numbers dance around, and design might change a little bit, which causes numbers to dance even more. And then we're still going back and forth with a client about why they should pick us or not, and not getting paid for it, but trying to convince a subcontractor to put in work to help us get to a number that might not even come to fruition in the last place. So I think that the way that you articulated that was very well said and agreed upon.
Yeah. So with that, we don't have much time, but maybe we can what's that? If there's any questions in the audience here, it'd be great to hear. And we've gotten a mic in the room, so that's great.
Hi, this is quite insightful conversation. So I think one of the complex unsolved problem in the industry is having instantaneous feedback loop for architectural structure design from construction point of view. And I'm sorry to put you on a spot for this. So I'm using this opportunity to ask, is it possible for construction companies to remove confidentiality from the data and make an open source repository of data so we can build some machine learning models?
You want our data? Is that what I heard?
Like some of the
Yeah, want it
data.
free? Not right now.
No, I see. I mean, I think we can have a whole nother discussion about data. I think that's the next, and we kind of heard it in the first group of speakers that kind of data is where the secret sauce lies actually. So to answer your question, that's a tough question, Meyer.
I guess I could take a little bit of a stab at it. Firstly, probably say, maybe we should talk after, but also be like, yeah, that's a scary one, just to be like, yeah, here you go, right, have at it. But I will say, like, especially in talking, we've been going back and forth with the test fit guys actually for quite a bit. And what they have as far as a design optimization tool is fantastic. Then there's certain aspects of that where if you do have usable data, and I'm saying usable there freely, usable data from a Suffolk or a Turner or a Skanska or a STO standpoint, how would you actually, so what value would you actually get out of that? As if to say, we might have historical cost database that test fit might not have access to. So for us, it's like, you kind of feel like you might have a little bit holding a little bit of like the keys to the castle there. And same goes with constructability rules, right? But like at the same point, it's like, we're not going to try to develop something in-house and compete with somebody who's doing this full go. And so how do we work together to overcome that? I think is more kind of a better way to frame that question.
Yeah, I think we have to talk about which data we're talking about. I think trends and stuff we can maybe work around, but maybe localized information is kind of ours, too. But maybe some trends there that we already share actually are available, So depends on what kind of data we're looking for here.
I want to extend on that question just a little bit, because the software companies that you use, the AECtechs of the world, the Procores, all of them, also are using that exact same data for their purposes. So to that, I would also just kind of wonder, or maybe a bit of a challenge, and you're already thinking about this, but within architecture, we've kind of ceded some of those responsibilities and we've not engaged with it. That's what we keep running into. I'd be interested in what you guys want to actually do with this, what you want to offer out there to the market to make the construction practices better, rather than necessarily ceding that authority of using the data to improve the industry purely to the software companies.
Yeah, let me jump in there. So part of our data strategy right now has a pretty exciting project underway, which is actually could be used by designers as well as owners. And it's really taking the parameters of your project, everything from size, scope, sector, location, finishes, and taking all of our data that we've had and really giving you a scorecard on how successful and where the pinch points of that project are going to be. And it could be a material that we talked about earlier. It could be because of the location, because of a labor shortage. It could be anything. And it would give you almost a playbook on decisions that you need to make. If this is where you want to build your project, or how you want to build your project, or how you want to design the project, it's akin to, I'm sending my daughter to college. I'd love for somebody to say, if she goes to Penn State, she's going to get a 3.2. If she goes to, Clemson, she's going to have a 4.1 or whatever it is. That's really kind of a service that we want to promote. And we're starting to analyze now is how can we give you some confidence of the outcome of your project as an owner or as a designer that gives you the things. It's even, we're boiling it down to, boy, when we get these two trades together, it never works well. And that's only held by that project manager, that super goes, no, we're not putting those two together. But if we can take that knowledge that we kind of have just inside our heads and somehow use our data that says, boy, lessons have proved that we're not doing this again. And if we do it again, we got to change this data point. And we got to change this decision early because we're not going to have that same outcome. Or, on the bright side is, boy, this looks really good. And if we change these two things, this job's going to be one of our zero punch list jobs, and everybody's going to walk away happy. That's where we're trying to take data.
Yeah, I would say that there's two aspects of that. The first is definitely the cost repository that we've built up over the last 5 years that leverages all of our historical data. We use that upfront, obviously, in the pre-construction side of the house. And really what we use that for is to inform our client as to where their job is headed, just based off of historicals, right? Like we see the plot of land, we built a very similar type, just 2 blocks away. Here's what it costs. Here were the subcontractors that did that. Here's where we think that the prices are actually heading from maybe even a commodity standpoint. We kind of built that all in. So the idea there would be, how do we get information, pertinent information, back to key stakeholders of the job, be it owner, developer, architect, engineer, quicker, and make that pre-construction process start to compress that a little bit. So instead of the value engineering cycle that we all know and love that takes 9, 12, 15, 18, 24 months, and then all the prices change and you start to go through the iterations again. The idea of that being, let's have this be a seamless integration, and we want to be upfront with that data. That's the first aspect I would speak about. The second one would be our constructability rules. And we actually use a company in Israel that kind of, it actually does it off of 2D drawings, but you upload 2D drawings to it. We upload constructability rules that we've built out based off of RFIs over the last 10 years at Suffolk. So we put through probably 7,500 of them, but it catches some of the constructability rules as if to say, we see this same detail here. It didn't work before in the last job. Here's a suggested new detail, and you get a full report that kicks out from that, and it does it in about 24 hours. So that's what I mean a little bit about like trying to augment what we're trying to do just to get the process moving a little bit faster. I think one of the key points of that is being super open and making that data very visual and very digestible by all parties, so everybody understands what we're talking about and it doesn't feel like a general contractor black box, because that's not what we want.
So I just want to, you have one last question, and then we have to wrap up because we're having lunch. So
Jennifer, you mentioned earlier that a lot of the work that your team is doing is strategizing around what things to go after and kind of how do you quantify like what to look into? So I'm wondering, how do you make those strategic decisions, and what does the structure look like around that kind of decision making?
Well, I don't know if we have enough time for that whole answer, and I don't want to stand between you guys and your lunch. But for us, it's really about working with a key group within leadership that are both have a broad knowledge of the business, but also have a strong direct connection with the work. And then going through processes of looking at both where we want to be and where we currently are, and how, because a gap is just an opportunity for innovation. So at its simplest, that's basically what it is. There's lots of other stuff back behind the scenes, but when it really comes down to it, it's looking for those significant gaps and where we can jump in and make a difference.
all right, with that, big thanks to our panel.